On today's video, we're going to be looking at the top 10 worst neighborhoods in Sarasota, Florida. Now, like any city its size, it's going to have some bad neighborhoods. In 2023, Sarasota reported 0 homicides for the entire year, making it one of the safest cities in the United States. For a city of 57,000 people to have 0 homicides for an entire calendar year is absolutely exceptional. The town of Sarasota has 57,000 people, and so does the town of Bradenton. These two cities are right next to each other. The north side of Sarasota and the south side of Bradenton are right next to each other. Just one single neighborhood in Bradenton had 4 homicides in a 2-month period. So while the city limits of Sarasota doesn't have really bad areas, the metropolitan area does. But there is one exception, and it is the north side of the city, which is the area near the airport. This area has the highest crime rate, and usually the worst things in town happen there. You have to understand that Sarasota really is a very safe city, but any metropolitan area this size is going to have some bad neighborhoods. And in today's video, we're going to find out exactly what those bad neighborhoods are. To generalize, we could say that the northern part of the city is where most of the crime happens. In particular, the area around the airport is the African American community. However, it's noteworthy that in the Sarasota area over the last few years, most of the homicides that have happened in the city and in the surrounding area have not all taken place in the African American community. And this is a very important point, because despite the fact that it is generally conceived, the idea that Newton, or the area near the airport in North Sarasota, is the city's worst area, over the last few years, some of the craziest crimes haven't been happening in these inner city neighborhoods, but in the more affordable suburbs. And that right there could be the key. Yes, there are rundown neighborhoods and abandoned shopping plazas and a lot of homelessness in North Sarasota, but some of the worst crimes have been happening evenly distributed throughout the whole city or surrounding metropolitan area. Not all of Sarasota area is within city limits, and there were homicides in Sarasota County. Predominantly, most of these homicides are going to be coming from the white demographic, which make up the largest percentage of the population in this area. This woman was arrested for a homicide in Sarasota County, and she was also giving substances to children. Then there's always the little white boy that wants to prove to the world that he's tough. Now, these are actually pretty dangerous individuals because they're trying to prove that they're gangster. The Sarasota and Tampa area in general is plagued with these wankster, wannabe tough white boys. They go around town mugging people with face tattoos and trying to prove to the world that despite the fact they're white and grew up in a nice setting, that they're still from the streets. This is a huge problem in this area. As an Uber driver in the Sarasota area, I'll pick these kids up in the suburbs and drop them off in the hood, so in the daytime they can perpetrate their gangsters, but at night they go back to mommy and daddy in a nice mansion. In the Sarasota area, many of the homicides have historically happened around homeless camps. These two right here in Bradenton, Florida, killed somebody right off of US 41. That's the highway we're on right now on the Bradenton side, and on an empty lot facing US 41, they buried the body. This fine specimen here was also related to the homicide of 2 homeless women in a homeless camp in the Sarasota area. So the problem with homeless camps is that they are evenly distributed throughout the Sarasota area. Some are in the south side of the city, some are in the north side of the city, some are off of University, some are off in the suburbs. And thus, these types of homeless camp homicides could really happen anywhere in a wooded area right behind your private community. And even far out suburbs like Northport are commonplace now to see homicides, mostly within the white community. So you're starting to see homicides in the suburbs, in the outskirts of the city. And that makes it really tough to pin down what particular neighborhood is actually the worst. And some of the worst crimes are happening kind of evenly dispersed throughout the whole city. But they happen in homeless camps, they happen in low-income apartments, And Sarasota is to a small degree a contrast city, which means on one side of the road you got beautiful high-rise apartments like this, but you walk 1 block away and you can be in an all-out homeless camp, which means that in a city of contrast neighborhoods, the rich people are usually within very close proximity to some of the worst neighborhoods in town. This sporadic nature of homicides in the Sarasota area means that compiling today's list is somewhat challenging for me. But overall, if I were buying a house or moving to the Sarasota area, these are the top 10 neighborhoods that I would personally avoid because they're considered the worst neighborhoods in the city. And keep in mind that the vast majority of these neighborhoods are going to be on the north side of the city. Number 10 is Cattleman, located parallel to Interstate 75. These are apartment complexes that come right up against the interstate. At first glance, it may not look like a bad neighborhood, but living in this congested area means that there's always people in and out. Just earlier this year, there was even a shooting at the Sarasota Commons shopping plaza off of Fruitville, which just goes to show that these shopping plaza areas, and particularly the apartment complexes adjacent to them, can be pretty troublesome places to live. As expected in any urbanized area like this, you're going to have homelessness, homeless camps, and in particular along Interstate 75, just about every single empty lot, especially near the off-ramps, are going to have a huge amount of homelessness. So if you're moving to one of these new quote-unquote luxury apartments along the interstate, just realize that it may actually be more bougie than you could imagine. While the Sarasota area doesn't have a high murder rate, it does have a high overdose death rate. Many of these bougie apartment complexes along the interstate lend themselves very well to all types of illicit activity. Many of these suburban areas in the United States are having more people die from overdoses than inner cities like Detroit are having deaths from gun violence. So that should give you an idea that while these areas are not dying off through violence, they're dying off through addiction. And in the Sarasota area, addiction is still a huge problem, and it is leading to a lot of overdose deaths. So much focus is put on violence in the United States when you talk about safety, but let's not forget that the United States and some of these suburbs are infected with illegal substances, and that many people are losing their lives not to violence, but to addiction. And that is one thing that does plague the Sarasota area. These bougie apartment complexes in the suburbs are plagued with addiction. Number 9 is Kensington Park. This neighborhood will fool you. A gathering place for homeless and vagrants, anything off of Lockwood Ridge, is the highway connecting Sarasota and Bradenton. The two worst neighborhoods in both cities are adjacent. Despite its proximity to nicer areas near University, this particular neighborhood at heart has more ties to the inner city hoods. Earlier this year, there was a shooting that led to the death of a woman in Sarasota, and it happened in this area of town. Number 8 is North Sarasota. As the name would suggest, it's north of Sarasota. Again, the worst general area of the city. Sarasota is known for its amazing beaches, but many of the people living in these inner city neighborhoods rarely get to see the beach unless they're actually working on a beachside condo. These people are working heavy hours, living in very affordable housing for the area, but the rents in these neighborhoods are still ridiculously expensive overall. If anything good can be said about this area is that many people from Miami are starting to move to Sarasota. You're starting to see a lot of Cubans, Brazilians, and other people who just can't afford to live in Miami anymore, and they're moving to North Sarasota. There's a small Hispanic community here, and it's growing. Over time, this could drive out more of the undesirable element. After all, the people moving here are looking for affordability and to grow the Hispanic community, and that could lead to more small businesses. But in the meantime, it still remains one of the worst areas of Sarasota to live in. Many of these apartment complexes are even gated, which just makes them kind of little fortresses within bad neighborhoods. Anytime you have a lot of affordable housing in a neighborhood, it's eventually going to create opportunities for people that are more disadvantaged to move in, and thus this area, North Sarasota, definitely isn't one of the places you want to move to in town. Many of the people moving here from Las Vegas or Houston or other large cities tell me that they feel safer here in this part of Sarasota than they did in Miami, Houston, Las Vegas, and other neighborhoods where they lived. This Uber driving thing that I'm doing now is giving me a real good insight into the neighborhoods of the city. Not only just a general idea, but like I get to meet real people within the neighborhoods talk to them about where they've lived before and how they feel about their neighborhoods. And in this particular area of North Sarasota, they're telling me that it's safer than the hoods in Miami, safer than the hoods in Las Vegas, Phoenix, any of the other large cities where these people lived in before. I've talked to people who've moved to this neighborhood from Houston, and they tell me that they feel much safer here than in Houston. The only complaint that I've got is that the incomes in Las Vegas appear to be better than Sarasota. But the Latino community is growing in Sarasota, a demographic that in Miami led to lower homicide rates, lower crime rates in general. So that right there isn't exactly a bad thing. But regardless, the Sarasota area offers something that many cities in Florida can't provide: jobs and incomes that are actually manageable for the cost of housing, something many places in Florida can't compete with. And if some of these worst neighborhoods are getting filled in with people looking for affordability, looking to work, means that you're going to replace a bad, stagnant population of locals with a new, more industrious population of people looking for a better future in Sarasota. All that can mean great things for the city. After all, many times the worst parts of a city say more about a city than the best parts of a city. If you have bad neighborhoods filled with crime, poverty, well, that makes your city look bad in general. So when your worst neighborhoods are on the come up and improving, like North Sarasota, it says a lot about the city's future. While many other cities like Fort Myers have gone on a crusade against their Hispanic and Black communities, recently Fort Myers has been plagued with homicides and violence. Sarasota doesn't have that problem. While Fort Myers has gone on a crusade against the Black and Hispanic communities, Sarasota has been investing money into the Black and Hispanic communities, and that is why Sarasota had 0 homicides in 2023, because Sarasota is actually investing into the regular poor people. They're giving people the opportunity to make something. They're investing in their neighborhoods. If cities like Fort Myers could learn something, they should learn something from a place like Sarasota, where instead of persecuting their poor communities, they're giving them the resources that they need to be successful. And look at the results. You have in Florida a city with crime rates on par with places like Canada or California, while the rest of the state of Florida, cities like Fort Myers, are now competing with places in the deep south. Adjacent Bradenton is another mess, a city definitely going in the wrong direction. I've met a lot of African Americans from Fort Myers who moved to the Sarasota area and then tell me that in Fort Myers it was a constant police persecution after them. Since they moved to Sarasota, they've been able to focus on their life and getting jobs and improving their lives, and they find better quality of life as a poor person in Sarasota than they did as a poor person in Fort Myers. But the city can only do so much. The private sector needs to invest into these communities, and these Cubans, Brazilians, Ukrainians, and other people moving to Sarasota are going to have to start small businesses and really lay roots in the city if they want their communities to grow and be established. And while the demographic of North Sarasota is changing rapidly, I'm not really seeing that investment in the small businesses. Number 7 is Televas. Now, this is an area adjacent to the Sarasota airport, and it's not really a real neighborhood, all that, and part of it is actually in Manatee County, but there are Sarasota addresses that are not in Sarasota County. They're in Manatee County. You'd think most of Manatee County would be a Bradenton address, but there are Sarasota addresses in Manatee County, and that is the area we're talking about here. This area is mostly some old dilapidated hotels along US 41, and then when you cross over into Televas, there's a few new apartment complexes. It's just an area that really isn't very well laid out, a lot of commercial areas, but there are a few residential neighborhoods and apartment complexes in this community surrounded by all this commercial and industrial crap. It really is a crappy place to live. Vagrancy and homelessness here is through the roof. And some of these residential streets that are left here in this kind of dilapidated, bad area of town are some of the most crime-infected areas in the entire Sarasota metropolitan region. Any housing near industrial and commercial areas like this that are falling apart are going to be guaranteed bad places to live. You will do yourself very well to avoid living in this part of town. Number 6 is Whitfield. Again, another community that's right on the Manatee-Sarasota line. Some people say it belongs to Sarasota. Some people say it belongs more to Bradenton. But regardless, it's still kind of part of the Sarasota area. Along US 41 and many of the major highways, homelessness is visible and misery is not hard to find. But when you enter the residential neighborhoods, it actually looks pretty decent. So you may ask yourself, what could go wrong with living in this beautiful looking neighborhood if the residential side is nice? Is the fact that while these houses and communities look beautiful, they're surrounded by nothing but bad areas. Theft, property crimes, homelessness, vagrants are always not too far away and willing to inquire about your property when you're not around. So while this neighborhood may actually look very beautiful, it is still surrounded by some pretty bad neighborhoods. Lots of homelessness and addiction means that while the residential area looks fairly nice and beautiful, it is still a bad region of the city. And in fact, lodged between North Sarasota and South Bradenton, it just seems like it doesn't matter what direction you're driving, and if you're leaving this neighborhood, you're going to have to go through some pretty sketchy areas. If you ever find yourself in this neighborhood, I definitely recommend Mi Havana Cuban Cafeteria. It is one of my favorite Cuban restaurants in the area. Myrna's is another very popular Cuban restaurant in this area, and it's a good restaurant, but when I'm out here, I personally prefer Mi Havana, not to be confused with Havana Cafe. That's a little bit further to the north, and that actually does have a Bradenton address. While this neighborhood may actually look very beautiful, if you look a little bit closer, you realize that some of these properties are older and they're kind of in disrepair, and houses that are this big, properties that are this big, actually require a lot of maintenance, and many of the elderly people living here simply aren't going to do it, which means that while the neighborhood looks beautiful now, the future of this neighborhood could actually mean, well, just properties going to crap. You can almost start to see it in some of the landscaping as well. Perhaps if people from the Miami area keep moving into Sarasota, a neighborhood like this could see a positive change. But for now, the future of this neighborhood doesn't look very good. And even if the neighborhood were to improve, again, it's still surrounded by some of the worst neighborhoods between both cities. And it really is sad to say that, because overall, it is a beautiful neighborhood. Number 5 is Indian Beach. Within this neighborhood sits the Ringling Museum, one of the most incredible places to visit in the Sarasota area. A beautiful neighborhood with beautiful, expensive homes, but unfortunately, the proximity to some of the bad neighborhoods here means that homelessness, vagrancy, and of course, if you're just going to the gas station right outside the neighborhood, you're seeing some pretty bad inner city stuff. So despite the fact that the residential neighborhood is beautiful, is expensive, is even on the water, it's a very desirable neighborhood real estate wise. It's sadly adjacent to an area that is crime ridden, businesses are abandoned, and many of these motels do nothing more but attract low-life criminals. This area actually used to be a lot worse many years ago. It's improved tremendously, but there's still businesses boarded up, homeless people sleeping in the parking lots, shopping carts abandoned with garbage everywhere. And of course, the property crime rate here is through the roof because many of these homeless people are desperate to get their hands on anything. Going to a gas station here late at night is somewhat intimidating. Beautiful neighborhood, beautiful homes adjacent to areas that make it undesirable. It definitely belongs on today's list. And I hate to say it, while it hasn't happened yet, it doesn't have beaches, but it is on the water, and in the case of a hurricane, we all know what that could mean for this neighborhood. Storm surge, flooding. Thankfully, it hasn't happened yet, but regardless, even if it doesn't happen, look at all the destruction in this neighborhood. Clearly, a neighborhood not going in the right direction. Until this neighborhood really finishes the gentrification process, and these rundown bedbug motel places are turned into something else. And the fact that still, this is the highway connecting Sarasota to Bradenton, all of the homelessness along US 41, anytime you're living near a large highway like this, means that there's always going to be a lot of foot traffic. And living in a residential area adjacent to a major highway is usually a lot of trouble. I can't imagine paying millions of dollars for a home, and then when I go to the closest gas station, I'm worried about my safety. But hey, that is where many neighborhoods in Miami used to be many years ago, and today they're desirable addresses. In Sarasota, has a lot more to offer than Miami in a lot of ways, so perhaps the improvement could continue. But it's going to take, again, real estate investment, and more than anything, just getting rid of the riff-raff motels and other cheap, affordable hotels near the beaches and airports. You still have all these bed-bug-ridden motels. They really need to be higher-end resorts. Until that happens, if it ever happens, this area will always attract riffraff. And many of these motels just couldn't keep enough crackheads in them, are now turning into apartment complexes. So you have these apartment complexes that used to be motels. That is never a good thing for a neighborhood. Basically, this is the area for vacationers who can't afford a resort, so they end up coming to Florida but having to stay in a bed-bug inn. Area is absolutely crime-ridden, and a lot of these hotels and motels, obviously we know what they're being used for. Many of the tourists who I pick up and stay in these types of places tell me that they think that their hotel is being used as a front for something else. Scary stuff. Number 4 is Bayou Oaks. Basically everything we just said about the previous neighborhood, but with more trees. This neighborhood is directly south of the airport. As I'm picking tourists up, they look across the street and they're like, wow, that neighborhood looks scary. I'm like, yep, it sure is. Now this residential neighborhood backs up in the US 41. For some reason, I don't understand. A lot of abandoned vehicles and things that are stolen are just dumped in this neighborhood. It's surrounded by a bunch of bad areas, so it's like a just really crappy place to live. You got bad neighborhoods in all directions, and for some reason, again, that I don't understand, it seems like if anybody's dumping a stolen car in Sarasota, this is the neighborhood where they decide to dump it. You always see like cars on the side of the road that are crashed, burnt up, stolen, Kia Boy type of crap. This is where they dump their vehicles. Number 3 is Central Coconut, or Central Coconut, or just Central. People call this neighborhood all types of names. Located within walking distance of downtown Sarasota if you head north. This is practically the Skid Row of the Sarasota area. This is an open-air homeless camp where people dry age their bodies on the sidewalks in the Florida heat. It's starting to gentrify, and this could be something like what Overtown in Miami was, a commercial industrial area that little by little the breweries and all the hipster places moved in and eventually gentrified the neighborhood. It's starting to happen to a small degree, but it's not enough yet. This neighborhood really has a long way to go, but it could be another Overtown. It could be a type of place where eventually it gentrifies and it becomes better, but as of now, sadly, not even the proximity to downtown has helped to change this neighborhood's reputation. It really is a bad place to stay. A lot of people have actually turned these houses that are left here, or little apartments, into like Airbnbs, and they rent them out to tourists. And I pick up people that are staying from out of town, and they're really staying in some pretty scary neighborhoods. Of course, proximity to downtown means that eventually this neighborhood will no longer exist in the way we see it. It's eventually going to get built up and turned into something nicer. But for now, definitely a scary area, very close to downtown. I personally wouldn't want to live here. Downtown Sarasota is just plagued with a chronic homeless problem because there's like a bus station here. I think eventually Sarasota is really going to have to find a better place for the homeless population that isn't so close to the core of the city, the downtown. But again, it's a manageable population. You might have maybe a few hundred at most, maybe 100 homeless people. Whatever the situation is, I think the city of Sarasota can actually afford and should invest in getting these people off the streets, the ones that are chronically from here, the ones we see every day. And that's one thing about the homeless population in downtown Sarasota, is that like me as a local, I'm already familiar with the faces. It's the same people over and over again. A lot of them have mental health problems. A lot of them have had run-ins with the business owners. They're kind of known to everybody. In fact, I remember a while back I was in downtown Sarasota, and one homeless woman that I see around town all the time was having an argument with a local business owner. I think Sarasota can and should do something about the chronic homeless problem, especially since it's a manageable population, and a lot of these individuals really are starting to kind of have a lot of run-ins with business owners and stuff. It's not really an ideal situation, but the homeless population here is manageable, and it is centered around this neighborhood, and I think they can handle it. I think the city of Sarasota can provide resources to get the ones that are chronically from the city the help they need and get them off the streets. It's just so close, Sarasota is, to being almost perfect. But when you have a visible open-air Skid Row right next to your downtown, that never looks good. And it's possibly one of the failures of the city of Sarasota failing to address the visible homeless problem. And I think it has something to do with the fact that these individual homeless people are having run-ins with people in town, and they might have some personal thing going on. They're not strangers, they're known to them, but as long as you have homeless people arguing with business owners in your downtown, that's never good for anybody. It's not good for the tourists, it's not good for the businesses, it's not good for the homeless people. Definitely a problem that needs to be addressed. One of the few bad things that you can say about Sarasota is that they freaking have a Skid Row. I'm gonna be honest, a lot of the tourists that come down here do point out to me that they feel that there's just too many homeless in downtown Sarasota, and they feel that a city this wealthy should be able to address this problem. And there's a lot of generosity in the Sarasota area. I do what I can to help homeless people as I'm able to, but the reality is that it shouldn't be left up to regular people like myself who are generous and kind and every once in a while are able to help the homeless people. This is really something that the city of Sarasota should be addressing. I feel like as long as the city streets are just littered with homeless people that are hungry and dealing with necessity, the city's always going to be plagued with this reputation. And I feel like Sarasota really can handle this. It's not like in Bradenton where it's just a completely chronic, difficult situation. I think Sarasota's homeless population is manageable, and it shouldn't be that difficult for a city that has this many resources to be able to help the homeless population in a way that's effective. And there is a lot of help. Ultimately, the final decision many times rests on individuals who don't really do the right thing. Number 2 is Newton. Now, this is in fact the most notorious neighborhood in the entire city of Sarasota. It is the heart of the African American community, and unlike other cities in the United States, the city of Sarasota actually has given a lot of resources to their African American community. For one, the geographical location is prime. Located between the airport, downtown, you couldn't ask for a better geographical location. This community has had a lot of investment. Many of these buildings have been remodeled, repainted, or others have just been knocked down, and today they're living in new apartments. The people that live here are hardworking people. I've taken a lot of rides to these projects, and usually they're very hardworking people. If you have conversations with them, very decent people. Don't let this neighborhood's bad reputation make you think that everybody that lives here is a bad person. In fact, many of the people that I've met and I've taken to this neighborhood are among some of the most memorable Uber trips that I've done. There really are good people in this community, and the city of Sarasota has given these people opportunities and investments more than anything. Martin Luther King, which rides right through the heart of Newton, has had a lot of investment. That investment has in turn made the area more expensive, and many people have been put under pressure because of gentrification. Now, the demographic here is still economically disadvantaged. Inherently, part of the United States' biggest problem is how it's treated their African American communities. But as the city of Sarasota itself sits, this area has had paved roads, new sidewalks, new businesses, new investments, and even the public housing is being transformed into newer apartments. Despite all that, some people just can't take opportunities, and they can't make something good out of themselves. I have seen African American communities that are truly abandoned, truly disengaged from everything economically, and in those communities, it's understandable that some people don't choose the right path. But unfortunately for many people in this neighborhood, it's not the lack of investment, it's not the geographical setting, it's the fact that these individuals have a culture of street life, and that means that many people here pick delinquency. And there is a lot of crime happening in these neighborhoods. Newton has the reputation of being the most dangerous neighborhood in the city of Sarasota. And despite the fact that the city has done everything from sidewalks to investment, fixing the buildings, everything you could imagine to give these communities the fair treatment they deserve, not everybody takes advantage of those opportunities. Thankfully, though, a lot of people do take advantage of the opportunities that are being given to them, and they're doing a great job of bringing their families in the right direction. But there's always that element that picks the street culture optionally because you're not forced to do it. Number one, the worst neighborhood in Sarasota is Amaryllis Park, which is part of the greater Newton area. The difference is that here it is residential homes. On the other side, it's government housing. The government housing has requirements, and the people there have to work with the government to make sure that they're moving in the right direction. Here, it's single family homes, and it really is one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in the city of Sarasota. Clearly, the rest of these neighborhoods that we've talked about today, they have their problems. But when you talk about this particular neighborhood, it is definitely a dangerous place to go. Like I said, I take people to the projects all the time, and I haven't had any problems. But this particular section of Newton, most of the people that I pick up here are people that are in bad neighborhoods doing questionable activities, and many times I'm taking them back either to a motel or to a rehab center, which from this neighborhood to a rehab center just gives you an idea of the type of activities that happen in this neighborhood. It really is a neighborhood that's plagued with problems. And even many times, if I do get a ride to this neighborhood, I'll drop somebody off, I'm taking them to work or something. When you drive through the neighborhood, you get some hard looks, you get people that follow you around, or you get other people that outright scream at you, why are you in their neighborhood? Interestingly, I'm going there to drop off somebody or pick up somebody from work, so I'm actually helping your community by providing my service of transporting the people, something that other Uber drivers won't do. But usually in neighborhoods like this, the scenario is that the people that are trying to do good have to deal with the people that are doing bad. And the people that are doing bad many times harm the people that are trying to get out of the trap of inner city poverty. All right, guys, so those are the top 10 worst neighborhoods in the city of Sarasota and adjacent area. There's still a lot of shady neighborhoods we didn't talk about. Apartment complexes that are known to have trouble. Other areas that you can see from the main highways. The south side of the city, Gulf Gate Estates. This is an area that has the abandoned mall. There's a lot of homelessness, vagrancy. There's even homeless camps on US 41 on the south side of the city. These areas don't really get as much publicity, and these neighborhoods do have great parts and great things, but there's definitely some sketchy parts in the south side of Sarasota. You get towards Vamo and Osprey, and they have some really bad neighborhoods as well. Of course, there's only 10 positions on today's video, so we couldn't include every single bad area, but this gives you an idea of what parts of the city are definitely the ones to avoid. Overall, you can find crime scattered evenly throughout the entire area, and Sarasota is somewhat of a contrast city where you can have on this side of the road a $1 million house and right behind it a homeless camp. But without a doubt, the area in Sarasota you definitely want to avoid is Martin Luther King, south of the airport in the area of Newton. This area also has, right here in the area where people gather, a lot of registered offenders, which means there's an extra danger to hanging out in these neighborhoods. This is the city of Sarasota, a city that really went an entire year without a homicide, but still has some very bad neighborhoods. While Uber driving in the last 2 months in Sarasota, I've been able to get a really in-depth feel of the city, the neighborhoods, and most importantly, the people that live there. And I've learned that many of the people that live in these neighborhoods are hardworking, good-intentioned people, but unfortunately, it's always that small percentage of people in these neighborhoods that make life impossible for everybody else. And while it is unfortunate that always the African American community ends up getting the title of the worst community, it is noteworthy that today many of the homicides that are happening scattered throughout the entire metropolitan area. In the United States, it used to be that just the African American community had that reputation, but today there's starting to be a shift, and we're starting to see, especially in the state of Florida, how many of the homicides taking place in the state are now happening among the white population, not as much among the black population. If this trend were to continue to happen in the United States, then these African American communities will no longer be considered the worst neighborhoods in the city. That's a possibility, but that will mean that the people that live in these communities are going to have to make an effort to eradicate the culture of violence. Because after all, in the city of Sarasota, there are opportunities. The city is investing in the African American community, and the African American community is situated economically in a great place. So the only thing holding people back here is the culture of crime that many people optionally choose. There are cities where the African American community is completely disadvantaged, but in the case of Sarasota, there's a lot of opportunity investment. You just have to take advantage of it, and many people are doing it, working hard, getting their families out of poverty, ensuring that perhaps in the future their children will have a better future than they did. Uber driving in this community has given me the opportunity to talk to the young people that live in these neighborhoods, and they're telling me that if you go into the streets and you end up in a life of crime at this point, it's optional. The schools now have sports programs. The communities are upgrading and investing even in government housing. People are finding jobs where they can make enough to eat and live. The young people that live in these communities are telling me that choosing the streets are optional because their community has invested in them. Are you going to take advantage of the opportunities that are being given to your family? Or are you going to continue to perpetuate a culture that so far has done nothing but hurt your people? Like I said, Uber driving in these communities has put me in close contact with the people that live in these neighborhoods, and I see people that are hardworking and trying to give their families the best they can. But unfortunately, for many people, the culture of the streets allures them and attracts them to a path that leads to nothing good. And while the people that live in these neighborhoods are doing everything they can to get their families out of these bad neighborhoods to somewhere better, many of the people who live in the suburbs get Ubered into the hood so they can perpetrate a street lifestyle, even though at the end of the day, they gotta go back and sleep with mommy and daddy in the suburbs. It's an allure that even the people that are from the suburbs want to perpetrate this street lifestyle. But regardless today, despite the fact that violent crime still disproportionately affects the African American community more than other communities, the overdose death rates are now more than 2 times higher among the white population by rate than the Hispanics and blacks, which goes to show that just because you have economical means doesn't mean that you're going to use that money for something that's going to benefit you. And in the suburbs and in the nicer areas of Sarasota, addiction and overdoses are killing more people than violence ever has. While in general the north side of the city is considered the worst part to live, anywhere you find yourself looking for housing in Sarasota, you're going to have to be paying close attention to apartments like the ones we see here on the left and the reputation that they have. Some of these apartments have a great reputation, others don't. It really varies from block to block. On one side of the street, you could have some really nice places to live, and a block away, you could have a homeless camp and other bad things happening because after all, Sarasota is, to a small degree, a contrast neighborhood city. Contrast neighborhoods means that on one side of the road, it's developing and growing, and on the other side of the street, you have poverty and crime. And that means that rich people are always in proximity to the poor. In the case of Sarasota, that proximity has meant that the poor people are able to have good jobs and good opportunities. But it also means that just because you're living a nice lifestyle, if you choose to do bad things, it's never far away. These are the top 10 worst neighborhoods in Sarasota, Florida.